Alright, so I finally have almost all the overclocks, but I'm going to start working through the overclocks that I do have, since I'm hopefully going to finish it off. For this guide, we're going to be talking about the Lead Storm powered minigun. This is the first of the primary weapons that you will acquire on your gunner, and this is going to be your starting gun for a little while when you first start playing the game. So, breaking down the important things, before we start breaking down the individual overclocks and what they do, it would be best to start by explaining what the mods do for the base gun, since you're going to be using this until you get your first dwarf promoted, and also the synergies with your secondary weapons, so you know which role is right for you. The minigun serves an interesting role of being a hybrid between a crowd control and a single target DPS weapon. It's not going to jump off the charts in any one category, but it's just generally good. Its base stats are 10 damage per shot, with a maximum ammo of 2,400 rounds. There's a short spin-up time on the gun before the gun actually begins pushing out bullets. This spin-up time and spin-up into its maximum rate of fire will reduce your reticule on the screen to make it more accurate. So, your accuracy starts out terrible, and as the weapon spins up and fires, gets better and better. This is not, by any means, a quick weapon. This is something you're going to be using primarily for large groups or extended periods of fire. There is an overheat mechanic on the gun that's indicated by this little meter. It's kind of hard to see right above the spikes there, but that overheat meter, when it fills, the gun goes into an overheat mechanic where you can't fire it for a certain amount of time. There's also a 20% chance per bullet to stun targets for 1 second. That's your base stats. What does this all translate into? Well, what this means is for your gear modifications as you're looking to build gear modifications. This is your tier 1. You get to choose between one of these three, which would be double your cooling rate once the gun stops firing, +4 to rate of fire, and increased accuracy. So, this reduces your base spread from its normal size down by 75%. Of these three modifications, it ultimately comes down to personal preference. If you want a faster time to kill, you can run rate of fire. If you find yourself in the overheat more often, you can run this, although I generally don't. There is a trick on improved platform stability, which is the faster your spin-up time and rate of fire is, you can actually completely avoid this modification and just go with those two for the rate of fire and the spin-up time. You don't need this. I personally just take this modification because I don't prefer the higher rate of fire, and I don't have the issue with the cooldown. This is my choice because it gives me a bit longer range. In tier 2, we have the choice between ammo and damage. Now, ammo and damage are very common themes. If you're looking to statistically build the gun for its best maximum build, almost all builds will tell you to focus on maximum damage as much as possible. However, this is a big however, if you're primarily more of a solo player, the extra ammo is more important to you as an individual player, because the damage scaling of the game is based off of the amount of players you have. More players means you want more damage. But if you're just playing solo with Bosco, nobody's on, or you're just grinding for overclocks and stuff, then the ammo is better because you spend less time mining for nitro. In addition to this, ammo can also be in a premium in situations where nitra in large groups, nitra is just very scarce. Nitra is very hard to come by because your team is calling supply drops a lot. Having the extra ammo can be more beneficial. So I personally normally go for ammo over damage outside of certain circumstances. For this situation, I'll go for ammo because this is primarily what I use until you start getting overclocks. Next up, you have your choice between armor break, stun, and penetration. So the stun is a decent crowd control option, and the gunner doesn't have very many crowd control options. What this does is it increases the stun duration from 1 second to 3 seconds, and the chance per bullet goes up from the 20% base to 40% base. Now, the downside to this is that some enemies cannot be stunned, and some enemies have a stun cooldown on them. So this is generally not that useful. It also doesn't help you kill anything that faster. the penetration and the armor break both do better things. Now, a large part of the community does not like armor break because armor break is, one, very glitchy, and two, not really needed. This is good if you want your armor to break through Praetorians to increase time to kill, but it's terrible against crowds of grunts. Penetrations makes it nearly impossible to kill Praetorians without another armor break weapon or a pickaxe. However, this allows you to basically double your bullet efficiency in crowds of grunts. So this comes down to personal choice. If I don't have any overclocks, I generally take the armor break. If I am running an overclock, I'll take blow-through rounds. At tier 4 is a toss-up between two things. First, you have the spin-up time mod, which means that the barrels will keep spinning after you've stopped firing the gun, which keeps your reticule smaller. This is worthless. You shouldn't ever take this. Your choice is really between these two. 15% bonus damage when the gun is at maximum stability, has its best accuracy, or a faster spin-up time. The faster spin-up time, the 0.4 second reduction doesn't seem like a lot, is actually the choice. While the damage at max stabilization is important, as the gun begins to cool and that reticule spreads, you lose that bonus damage. Also, 15% damage is not enough to move the needle on higher difficulties. At most, you're shaving off 1 or 2 bullets with a gun that fires about 30 bullets a minute. So, or 30 bullets a second. I personally prefer this one just so I can get into killing things faster. Your tier 5 modifications is normally a baby overclock tier, if you think about it. The choices here are generally going to be more than just stat changes to the gun, but in some cases they are just stat changes. The first option is aggressive venting. What this does is whenever your gun overheats, there is just burning damage and fire damage as applied to everything around you within a short radius. I believe it's either 4 or 6 meters. And it cuts the overheat time in half. However, I don't necessarily like doing this because I don't want my gun to overheat in the first place. The next option is hot bullets, which is a decent option. This causes that the rounds fired from the gun when your overheat meter is in red burn the target. This can allow you to set targets on fire if you're able to thread the needle on your overheat meter. Again, not really a big fan of this because it puts your gun in overheat. I primarily take Cold as the Grave. Every kill you get cools the gun by a certain percentage. This is my primary option for allowing me to maintain a high rate of fire per kill. This is a generally good crowd clearing build. If you're looking for more of a single target DPS, I would take the variable chamber pressure, I would take the hardened rounds, and I would take the high velocity rounds instead. Without overclocks, the best synergy for this weapon would be to run either the heavy revolver or the coil gun, with the heavy revolver being built for as high damage as possible, and the coil gun, well, being the coil gun. The burst fire gun is not a particularly great option with the minigun. It's kind of a double redundancy on it, because this is primarily a burst crowd control weapon, and this is primarily a burst crowd control weapon. Now that we have the base stats of the weapon out of the way, this is a basic build that works pretty good. This is what I'm generally choosing the overclocks around. Overclocks are generally divided into 3 tiers. Green ones, which are balanced overclocks, which have no drawbacks. Yellow, or balanced overclocks, I'm sorry, these are clean overclocks. These are the balanced ones. They have usually a positive and a negative. Some of these completely change how a gun functions, some of these do not. Unstable overclocks generally change how the gun functions to such a large degree because it's giving you either a very significant buff with many penalties or a relatively insignificant buff that changes how the gun completely plays with some negatives to boot. So, let's start with the clean overclocks first. A little more oomph gives you +1 damage and a +2 spin up time. It's -2, but we're going for this. If you run this, probably easier to show you with no modifications what it actually does. With no modifications on the gun, it really is nothing more than a glorified mod. If you're happy with the base gun, this can be a nice improvement, but there are significantly better mods that you can run to offset this in the form of overclocks. This is not an overclock that I would run for very long. This is what I would call a starting overclock. The next one that you have is the thinned drum walls, which again is another starting overclock in my opinion. If you don't have anything else, this can be good. This improves the cooling rate so the gun overheats less, and it gives you an extra 300 ammo, but neither of these really move the needle. See, you can get the bonus cooling rate. I did it again. You can get the bonus cooling rate off of this mod being better. If you want that, you can get more ammo if you want this, or more damage if you want that. Meaning you don't really need either of those two overclocks right here, because the mods that are provided actually provide a better benefit to you. For the yellow overclocks, however, is where we start to get into some more interesting things. Burning Hell causes your gun to overheat 50% faster than normal. However, you will burn anything within a short radius in front of your gun. I believe it's either a 2 or a 4 meter radius. I'm not sure which one. This applies burning fire damage to anything in front of you. This is the overclock that you want to run specifically with the Bulldog if you are running the volatile bullets overclock. It kind of has its own build where you're running volatile bullets, you're going to run the incendiary grenade, and then you're going to run Burning Hell. The problem to me with this overclock is it doesn't actually do anything to help the gun's overall performance. It just causes it to overheat faster, and in exchange you get extra fire damage from your gun from enemies directly in front of your gun. This is not a very significant overclock in terms of design. These two overclocks are both the overclocks I personally play the most and recommend the most, that being the exhaust vectoring and the compact feed mechanism. Exhaust vectoring is a bonus plus 2 damage. However, the cost is it greatly increases your spread up to 250%. This is a permanent reticule increase, which, even if you were to run the other modification in Tier 1, which would reduce your base spread, it's still going to take your base spread up a significant degree. However, it is much less of a spread than you would otherwise have. This is a key here. 62% base spread is quite reasonable for a +2 in damage. And if you're going for a full damage build, you can do that quite easily. This is the build I would recommend on this. It doesn't have a lot of ammo, but it is dealing 14 damage a bullet in exchange with no real penalty besides the fact that you have slightly less ammo and the spread is a little bit higher. This is comparable to the Lead Storm Overclock. The Lead Storm Overclock is one of the ones that is the most played. Lead Storm increases the base damage of the weapon by 4, taking you up to that same 14. However, it massively penalizes your stun, and it causes you to no longer be able to move while shooting. If you can learn how to bunny hop with this overclock is perfectly fine. I just don't like that. The massive damage that this bad boy can pack is a really cool feature to the weapon. For this, you take rate of fire. You can just absolutely keep the damage up. In this situation, there's no point in taking the stun, because the stun chance is meaningless. So you're going to take either the blow through or the hardened rounds. Basically, you have a big gun that kills a lot. Here's the downside to this: is you sacrifice much more mobility in exchange for accuracy in this build compared to running exhaust vectoring, which is the main reason I run exhaust vectoring more. Comparing the other modification, the one that I primarily run the most is the compact feed mechanism. What this does is it gives you a lot more ammo in exchange for a slightly slower rate of fire. 800 bonus ammo in exchange for -4 rate of fire. Now, the rate of fire is your time to kill, so to speak. So if you're going to run this mod, the one that you want to run with it is, well, improved motor, which gives you your +4 back. Because you have the extra ammo, you don't need to run the oversized drum, meaning you can run the high velocity rounds. Most builds that are running this only have 2,400 rounds to work with, which really means you run out of bullets fast in this. You can sometimes run out of those 2,400 rounds in a room or two, depending on the hazard difficulty you're playing on. Because of this, oversized drum is normally what I would take. However, because of the mod giving me the extra ammo, I can take high velocity rounds here. None of the other choices really matter more than anything. You can still take whatever you want with it, because the extra ammo is compensating the overclock. And even the trade-off of the slightly slower rate of fire, if you want it back, is increased by the improved motor. The last overclock would be bullet hell. Bullet hell is an interesting overclock that you either love or hate. What bullet hell does is it significantly decreases your damage. It decreases it from a base 10 to a base 3, meaning you need all of the damage overclocks in order to get your damage back up to normal. And it increases your base spread by an absurd degree. However, bullets will ricochet off of environment into enemies until they hit something that, well, they can hit, including other dwarves. The main reason why I don't like this is I just find this weapon to be so inconsistent. This weapon this overclock really only works if you are dedicated to clearing swarms. Its base version isn't particularly good. For this, you'd have to increase the accuracy, you have to increase your damage, you would need to have the penetrate or the stun in order to make up. You need the bonus damage back for your extra 1 damage at max stabilization, and you would want to have probably either the hot bullets on this one, because you're not going to be scoring a lot of kills with it, although you could realistically do that. The main reason why I don't run this overclock though as well has to do with the fact that it doesn't give you any extra ammo, meaning not only are you losing damage, but you're losing ammo in exchange for the ability to ricochet bullets. It's not a great choice. In my opinion, the best overclocks are the compact feed and exhaust vectoring. My number 3 option would be lead storm. My number 4 option would probably be a little more oomph, with the 5th option being thin drum walls, 6 is burning hell, and 7 being bullet hell. Not particularly great options, but the minigun with overclocks can generally pair the same way as without overclocks. There's no real situation in which you would make a different pairing with it just because of an overclock. It's a good weapon by base, but it's not anything to write home about. It's one of those steady, reliable options. Once you start building it and you have a decent build, you can kind of just pick it up and go with it. It's not going to have the crazy building potential of either of the other 2 options. The most extreme options that you have are big damage, no move, or little damage, bullet bounce, with everything else being fairly standard minigun play, thus making it feel relatively mundane compared to some of the more extreme options, but it's a reliable, safe option in pretty much any situation.